From the Department of Communication in Phillipsburg, this is a special edition of Inside Government with Cedric Peterson.
To our audience here at home and around the world, you are now Inside Government. And if you're just joining us, we're continuing in our series of fostering resilient crisis management, an exercise that St. Martin has undergone, especially post-Hurricane Irma, to ensure that the country increases its capabilities and how it goes about being resilient when dealing with crisis. In order to get more insight on this topic, we are teamed up with the team of VNG-i International. And if you've been following our series, our last episode, we spoke about regional collaboration. We've invited another expert to talk to us from VNG-i International, and joining me for this interview is none other than Operations and Procedures Specialist at VNG-i International, Mr. Han Pelster. Han, it's great to have you once again in the program. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Cedric. It's very good to be back again. Thanks.
We want to get into, the topic and kind of get into your expertise when it comes to the topic of operations and procedures when fostering resilient crisis management. But before we get into it, just for our audience, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you, your professional background, your education.
Of course. My name is Han Pelster, as mentioned, and I'm a disaster and crisis management expert already for almost 16 years, I think. I've been working, for example, for the Red Cross, but I also work for the United Nations and for the European Civil Protection. And next to that, for some bigger companies, I've been crisis manager there. But mainly for the United Nations and the Red Cross, I'm supporting countries who are having a disaster at this moment. So I can fly in within 24 hours after the disaster has struck. So I can support the country in the coordination of their disaster management to support the people.
Excellent. And that's exactly where I think we need to be when it comes to cooperation with our global partners and having that capability. I'm sure it's very taxing, but at the same time, it's rewarding when you're able to lend your expertise and it's valued in countries that you can help. Let's jump right into the topic as we are now looking at the next pillar of fostering resilient crisis management, and that is operations and procedures. First, let's start off. Can you explain what St. Martin's approach needs to be when it comes to crisis management in the context of operations and procedures?
Well, I think what's very important to understand that with regards to crisis management, St. Martin, of course, it's an island. Everybody there has a responsibility within crisis management, and that's both the population, so the people who live there, but it's also the government and the emergency services. And to be able to support and to work under tough conditions during a disaster and in the aftermath of a disaster, it is necessary that all the emergency services and the government, that they work accordingly their procedures that they have together with each other. So everybody knows what to do, who is responsible for what, and how can we solve this crisis? How can we support the people of St. Martin in the best way? So that's where procedures and operations kick in.
Han, when it comes to operations and procedures, the term scalability is also applied. How does St. Martin ensure the scalability of crisis management structures?
Yeah, that's something that we are working on right now, which is under development. If we look into the crisis management procedures that there are already in place or were already in place before this project started, it was normal police department and the fire department and ambulance services. They could work at an incident, for example, a car crash or whatsoever. Or you had to turn on your crisis management capabilities. And then all the ESF, the emergency support functions of the government, come together and they are going to work under an emergency operations center, the EOC. So everything was on or off. And what you see nowadays with regards to the last possible disasters that have been coming towards St. Martin, bigger hurricanes or bigger storms or smaller storms, you see that there's a need for scalability. So sometimes you need some of the ESFs to work together, but you don't need all of them. Or sometimes you need to be able to coordinate some things together, but you don't need the whole emergency operations center to be operational. And that's what we are looking into with scalability, so that you are able to use that what you need.
Focus in for us, and I want you to look at it twofold: organizational, and also for the layman that's watching this program, on how he or she can adapt their home emergency plan and procedures that they would need to execute in a crisis. What are the key elements of a resilient crisis management plan? Let's start first with at the organizational level. How should we be viewing this?
Yeah, from an organizational point of view, it's very important that the organization has their manpower in place, so that you know who is working in the operations during a disaster. So who's taking responsibility, but also who's executing things. And those persons, those people, they need to be trained, educated, and skilled. But they also need to be able to work with the right tools and with the right mandate and with the right procedures. So from an organizational point of view, I think that's key. If you're looking for the second question that you were asking me, if you're looking into the population of Sint Maarten, if you're living there, and how can you prepare for yourself, and also there with regards to scalability, of course, because if a storm is approaching the island, you can prepare yourself, or if another disaster is prone to come to the island, you can prepare yourself. And depending on the scale of the storm, you can also scale up or scale down your preparations in the house. Do you have to take your windows down, or do you have to shutter your windows, or do you have to take food and water as in stock? All those things. So that's what you have to look into. How do you take care of your family around you or your neighbors? What can you do together? I think that those are the main questions.
You mentioned the fact that your expertise takes you around the world, being able to travel from one country to the next, at least within 24 hours. Can you share with us an example of a crisis situation where you were able to successfully scale operations to manage this specific crisis? Give us an example of your real world experience.
Yeah, I can give you several, but I will focus on Bangladesh for this one. In Bangladesh, I've been working in the refugee camps with the Rohingya people, which is an enormous refugee camp. Tens and tens of thousands of people. And when we came there, it was just after the bigger influx of people coming over the border. And that's really where you had to scale up all the assets and all the people that you had to be able to cope with the enormous amount of people that we have to facilitate in the shelter. And looking there into scalability, it also means that you have to find yourself a way to get more stuff in country, to get more people coming over, to get more people coming from the capital to support. So it's to ensure that you have enough people, enough capacity, enough food, enough drinks, enough shelter to accommodate all these people. When I arrived there, that was within 1 or 2 weeks after the bigger influx. And what you could see there is that at that point, every day new people were arriving to start with supporting. But we also were able to, for example, get extra land from the government to ensure that we had places where we could build shelters. So that's also about your scalability.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Looking at St. Martin and ours, how can we assess ourselves as an organization and by extension a community when it comes to handling a crisis situation? What would your advice be in that situation?
And what do you exactly mean with assess?
Assess the readiness of ourselves as a government organization. Yeah. So let me rephrase. 3, 2, 1. Han, how can we as a government organization assess ourselves and, of course, the community doing that on their own within their own respective households, their state of readiness for handling a crisis situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think everybody needs to assess themselves if you're ready for a crisis situation. If look into a government perspective and an organizational perspective, it's all about preparation. So you have to think through, what do we need to do in case something happens? So what do we need to do, and what is the public requesting from us in case a big hurricane is approaching the island? And that comes into a very easy tick box list. And that list you can check every year before the hurricane season starts. But another way to do that testing and to see if you're ready for it is, for example, with bigger exercises. So the government is doing an annual exercise in HUREX, a hurricane exercise, and is doing an annual exercise in NATEX, a national exercise, where the HUREX has, of course, a subject, a hurricane, but the national exercise can have any subject. So any other kind of disaster, natural or man-made, can be the scenario. And by working in a scenario in an exercise, you can see if the emergency support functions, if the emergency services, and if the government itself, as an emergency operations center, are prepared for this scenario and are knowing what to do. And of course, an exercise also supports them with new knowledge of what do we need to develop, because we have new questions and we don't know how to address them yet, but we will find the answer in the coming period. So that's, I think, the main two things for the government to ensure themselves that they are ready for handling a crisis.
I'm speaking to Operations and Procedures Crisis Management expert, Mr. Han Pelster of VNG-i International, in what is our series dealing with fostering resilient crisis management. St. Martin, stay with us. We're going to take our first break and get back into our conversation with Han, where we're going to talk more about how you could continue to build operations and procedures within your own home plan, and how we as a government of St. Martin is also doing that. Stay with us. You're Inside Government.
You ever hear earthquake call and say, "Hello, Mr. Mara, it's me. Earthquake coming in Tuesday around 10. No, sir. Earthquake does arrive unannounced, and when it comes, it'll shake all the sense and the sensibility out of we. Remain calm, stay inside, and do the DCH. Drop, cover, hold on. Once the shaking start and you know it's an earthquake, make a quick move to a safe place. Don't run to the doorway or any exit, and the stairs that may be broke up or even full of people. Elevator, avoid that, because you might get in and then poof, power gone, and you're stuck in a box without air. Take cover under a strong table or a bed, or crouch against an inside wall or in a corner and cover your face and your head with your arms. Remember, DCH. Drop, cover, hold on. Glass windows and doors, outside walls in an earthquake, that is bad news. Take care of yourself. Most injuries during earthquakes happen when something drops and hit people entering or exiting a building. Last thing, don't bother run outside and ask, "You feel it? You feel it?" Remain calm, stay indoors until all the shaking stop, and do the DCH. Drop, cover, hold on.
This public service announcement was brought to you by Sedima and the Government of St. Martin.
Hi, everyone. If you're just tuning in, I'm having a conversation with Mr. Han Pelster, VNG-i International Crisis Management expert, and we're talking on the topic of operations and procedures as it relates to fostering resilient crisis management. Han, next question that I have for you, it really comes with the experience that one goes through and what happens post a crisis situation. How do you, or how can we, as a small island developing state, evaluate the effectiveness of a crisis management plan post an incident?
Evaluating your effectiveness of your crisis management plan post a disaster, there are several ways, of course, to look into that one. But most important is, how did the people, how did the community reacted, and how does the community feel that the government is taking care of them during this disaster? So were there enough shelters? Was the shelter quick enough in running? Was there enough water supply? Were we able as a government to ensure the power as soon as possible? Were radio frequencies able to broadcast? Were we in a good way able to communicate to the public what was expected from the storm or from the disaster, but also what was expected from the public. And did the public know what the government was doing? And the only way to check that effectiveness is to go in and have that discussion with the public, to check with your communities. Did we do a good job? So that's the main thing. And of course, secondly, you're always looking inside your own organizations. So with your evaluations, with your lessons learned, with your meetings that you have afterwards, but also about the general feeling of everybody who has been working in this disaster. What does it mean, and did we do a good job? Because I think overall that first impression that you have, that already gives you a very good insight. And that, together with the feedback that you get from the public, the feedback that you get from the colleagues, the feedback that you get from other organizations, I think that will give you a broader image on your effectiveness.
Okay. Because that feeds right into my other question. When it comes to post or having these experiences in whatever crisis we might be facing, whether it be the standard 6 months out of the year hurricane season or the ones that can occur at any moment, earthquake, tsunami, or any types of man-made disasters, on how we can incorporate those lessons, learn from past crisis situations into current and future operations. How do we, or how should we effectively do that? So, for example, coming out of this Hurricane Tammy situation, though not directly affected or impacted, like, for example, Barbuda, but we got our share of what that system had to offer. It brought with it some lessons, a little anxiety, a little tension, slowing down, speeding up. But the effective way of being able to incorporate these types of lessons, whether a hit or miss, but you're going through it, what would your take be on that? Or what would your advice be to us as a nation?
Well, I don't think it's only an advice, because I think a lot of things are already incorporated at this point.
Right.
Because an evaluation is being done every time the Emergency Operations Center is being active. Afterwards, there's an evaluation moment, and there's an evaluation report. And I think what's very important, and that's also what you can see right now, that the whole disaster, the topic of disaster management, is on a very high place on the agenda within the government. Money is available, people are available. There's an Office for Disaster Management, there's an Emergency Operations Center, the fire department is on top of it. And I think that really is guaranteeing that you're working in a progressive way in your disaster management. So it gets better every time and every day. And every disaster that you are encountering, bigger, smaller, the evaluations from that impact will be taken into account for the next one.
What are some of the key challenges you can say that we can experience as a growing country when scaling response operations during a crisis?
Of course, St. Martin is an island. I think that's one of the main issues. You know, if the harbor and if the airport are hit, there's immediately a big issue of getting people and getting emergency relief goods inside the country. Secondly, with a number of inhabitants on the island growing, and with the number of tourists on the island, there's also a need of skilled personnel, and there's also a need of enough personnel on every part of disaster management that should be operating during disaster. For example, you need to have enough ambulances and enough ambulance drivers and nurses. You need to have enough doctors. You need to have enough firemen at all times. But also your emergency support functions and the government bodies need to be filled with enough people. And I think one of the key issues, or one of the main issues on the island, is that you don't have that many people trained and educated in disaster management yet. It's improving. It's getting more and more, which is good. But that's one of the main issues, I think. If you look into what you already can see right now, And one of the things, if a disaster has happened, what's the main issue? I think if your port of entrance is being hit, those are the two main things. That pose a risk.
We always say that there's no 1-2 crises that are the same. They're all different in some form or the other. So the question is when we are scaling, when we are looking at operations and procedures, how can we accommodate for those uncertainties and those variables that comes with any types of crises? What would your expert opinion be on that?
Yeah, I think that's really where you hit the main part of crisis and disaster management. That's also why I start smiling, because that's what I really enjoy about crisis and disaster management. You don't make me very happy if we have written down every step that we take in a hurricane, because every hurricane will be different. But what is making disaster management such a beautiful thing is that the people who are working in disaster management are being trained and educated in solving issues that coming up their way during and after a disaster, and to try to find a working solution for that one at that point. So they're problem solvers, and they always have the mindset on improving and supporting the aid given to the people. So rephrasing your question, I think disaster management really is about finding a solution and finding opportunities in the problems that you have up front, and try to tackle them as soon as possible. And I think that's also the sport. If you can talk about the sport for people who work in disaster management, I think that is also the sport that you can find in there. That every time, every disaster is different. And it makes it beautiful that you can find a solution for a problem that you have never seen before.
Right. Now, we have so many different working parts when it comes to disaster management and all the different key stakeholders that are involved, especially here in St. Martin. ESF groups, we have non-governmental organizations that are partnered with us in order to ensure that we are able to effectively deal with crises as they take place. Can you share with us strategies that comes to mind from your experience for fostering resilience in crisis management teams, respectively? What would these individual units have to do in order to build resiliency within themselves to be able to manage a crisis should one take place?
Well, let me give there an example of how I go with my team from the Red Cross, for example. I work for Red Cross. If I go with my team of the Red Cross to a disaster area, it means that I have to be self-sufficient for at least 2 weeks. So I cannot be bothering the country or the government where I'm going into to support. So it means I bring my own food, I bring my own tents, I bring my own cars, I bring everything. So I'm self-supporting. So I'm there to support the country, but I'm not there to ask for anything else. I think if you look into all the bodies that are working on the island together, NGOs, organizations, government, etc., to look into your own organization and to make yourself fostering resilient crisis management, you have to make sure that your own organization is ready to run and to work at the moment a disaster will hit you. So it means that if you have a building, that you are responsible to make sure that you have your power supply up and running, that you have water in stock, that you have your staff trained in disaster management. So you don't have to ask the moment that we need people, you don't have to ask for support because you have your own organization not ready. I think that's the most important part. And then if you look into why is that this amount of organizations needed, I think globally, wherever you look, in which disaster, it's thousands of organizations that are working. People need to identify themselves with one of the organizations to be able to work in it. And all these organizations together, they all have a link with the community. They're part of the community. They're working with the community. They're part of the government. And together, they can ensure with the right information management. So everybody knows what's happening, everybody knows what's needed, everybody knows what is their responsibility. Together, they can make it work because together they're stronger.
Absolutely. Han, we're running out of time. I just want to give you the opportunity to provide final words, which you just eloquently put together, but some extra time given to you to provide final words to the public of St. Martin when it comes to, again, fostering resiliency in any crisis situation. What would that be?
Yeah, well, I think I put it together now for the organizations on the island, but now going to the public of the island. You can do a lot of things yourself. You can look into your housing. You can look into how prepared are you? How prepared is your family? Do you have your own operations and procedures in place? So the moment a hurricane is approaching or the moment a disaster is hitting the island, do you know what to do? Does your wife or your husband knows what to do? Do your children know what to do? Do you have a list of things that needs to be done? And do you know who's responsible for all those things? Who is buying the water? Who is making sure the windows are closed? Who is making sure that the car is parked in the right position? Who is checking with the parents or with the neighbors? So I think also on that perspective, operation procedures for people at home are just as important, and you have a responsibility there.
VNG International Operations and Procedures expert, a scaling structure expert, Han Pelster. Han, thank you so much for providing this valued information in our series on fostering resilient crisis management inside government. Thank you so much for joining me once again.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
And to our radio listeners, television viewers, and online viewers, thank you for tuning in and being a part of our 10-part series on fostering resilient crisis management. If you have missed my conversation with Mr. Han Pelster, be sure to catch video on demand at the official Facebook page of the Government of St. Martin, facebook.com/SXMGOV. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel of the Government of St. Martin at youtube.com @Government of St. Martin. And for audio playback, tune in to St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9 FM throughout the course of the day. On behalf of my colleagues at the VNG International, of course, here at the Government of St. Martin, I'm Cedric Peterson. Thanks so much for tuning in.